trial would be the Pretty Men Courthouse on Constitution Avenue, which is just a short walk from the U.S. Capitol. This fact terrified the former prosecutors and other experts I talked with about how the trial might play out. Right-wing politicians, including Trump himself, have intimated violence if he's indicted. Like the Capitol on January 6th, the courthouse could become a magnet for paramilitaries, with protesters and counter-protesters descending on the same locale. The occasion would tempt warfare. The prospect of such a spectacle fills Merrick Garland with dread, according to his friends. Joining us now is Franklin Foer, staff writer at The Atlantic and the man who interviewed General Merrick Garland. Franklin, it's always good to see you. Thank you for this reporting and thanks for your time tonight.
Hey, Alex.
So let me just ask a question I think a lot of us are wondering. Why do you think the Attorney General agreed to speak with you in this incredibly fraught time where, a sideways glance he makes on camera is parsed for what that might imply about a future indictment?
Right. And I should be upfront and say that when I spoke with Merrick Garland in June before the Mar-a-Lago raid, he did nothing that tipped his way. The Justice Department, at least in my dealings with it, really takes seriously its vows of silence. It doesn't talk about ongoing investigations, but I do think that Merrick Garland has taken a lot of criticism. There have been times when he seemed disconnected, and I think he suffered, especially in comparison to the January 6th Commission investigation on the Hill, which has done a vivid portraying a narrative, and he's taken a lot of heat for being extremely cautious. And so I think that he's decided that in certain venues, he's going to kind of step out and explain what he's doing a little bit more clearly, even if he's not talking about specifics.
So this is an attempt to clarify the situation, and yet you came away with it, and clarify the situation, but not issue any indictments, as it were. You came away with a pretty clear idea that he was going to issue an indictment against for former President Trump. Can you talk to me about how you came to that conclusion and the evolution you've seen the Attorney General undergo since he first came to office, in many ways trying to lower the temperature of things in the nation's capital and around the country?
So Merrick Garland is, I describe him as a hyper-prudential institutionalist. He is somebody who is, to his core, a very cautious person. He's a creature of the Department of Justice. He really, really cares about protecting and preserving this institution, which was tarnished by the Trump administration. And so he saw his mission as uplifting this institution. And he was somebody who, as a judge and as a person who is very collegial, who's very inclined to consensus building, he worked really closely with Republicans when he was a circuit court judge. And I think when he came to office, he had a certain idea about how the country could be restored, how the institution could be protected and preserved. But when you're Attorney General, you sit in this position where you have this very panoramic view of American life. And the assault on democracy is something, and the decay of our democratic culture is something that he observed really up close through the judicial system. And so I think over time, he wasn't exactly radicalized, but I think that he became kind of hardened and a little bit more confrontational and a little bit darker and more pessimistic when he thought about the institutions in this country. So I think that shifted him to a more confrontational stand as it relates to anti-democratic forces in this country. And then you have the emergence of the Mar-a-Lago documents case. And in contrast to January 6th, which is a very complicated case, the Congressional Commission has portrayed things in a very clear sort of way, but they're not making a case that can stand up in a court of law. And so I think that is a very difficult case for the Justice Department to bring. But the Mar-a-Lago case, I think, is much more black and white. It relates to a very core principle that Merrick Garland, it's just central to Merrick Garland, which is the rule of law, that there's nobody in this country who stands above the law, who's immune from the law. And so I think that this case, which is so much clearer, at least it seems from the outside, and the principle at stake is so central to the way that Garland thinks about the fabric of our democratic institutions, I think it is inevitable that he brings an indictment here.
All right, Franklin Foer, we will be catching up with you in the coming weeks and months. You know, this all has to come to pass before a new president is installed in theory. Franklin Foer, staff writer at The Atlantic. Thank you as always for your reporting, Frank. It's great to see you.
Great to see you. Thank you.
That does it for us tonight. We will see you again tomorrow. Now it's time for the last word with Lawrence O'Donnell. Good evening, Lawrence.
Good evening, Alex. And we're going to discuss Franklin Torres' article in this hour with Harvard Law professor Lawrence Tribe, who was Merrick Garland's constitutional law professor. He agrees. He believes that this article is absolutely right on, and it's a very good prediction of what Merrick Garland's going to do. Also, we have John Fetterman joining us tonight, Senate candidate John Fetterman. And Alex, I'm going to ask him about the health issue, but I have to tell you, I don't get it. I really don't get it. We have two current Democratic senators, one a little older than him, one a little younger than him, both of whom had strokes this year in office. And no one said, you got to quit. You can't be a senator if you have a health issue like that. Bernie Sanders had a heart attack when he was running for president. What did he take? 2 days off or something? He took like a week or so off, a little bit more, and no one said you have to get out. I don't quite get what, if any, controversy there really is about John Fetterman's health, but he'll join us. We'll discuss.
John Fetterman is fighting every inch of this race. He's not giving anything up. He is tenacious in a way that few in public life are. I cannot wait to see that interview. And Lawrence, as far as Frank Foer's reporting, he's the guy that talked to Merrick Garland. So I kind of listen to what Frank Foer says, because not a lot of people are talking to Merrick Garland in this present day and age.
And his article is so careful and carefully constructed. It's a careful article about a careful man that comes to a careful conclusion that does seem inevitable when you get to that.
It's hard to imagine that somehow this doesn't end with some kind of indictment somewhere along the way. Time will tell. Have a great show, Lawrence.
Thanks, Alex. Thank you. Well, tonight, the United States Supreme Court has the Justice Department's response to Donald Trump's appeal to the Supreme Court in the appropriately titled case of Donald J. Trump versus United States of America. The Justice Department used all of the 7 days granted by the Supreme Court to file its brief, which was due today. The 32-page brief signed by the Solicitor General appears to crush every point made by the Trump lawyers in their appeal to the Supreme Court. The Solicitor General's brief leans heavily on the unanimous opinion of a 3-judge panel of the 11th Circuit Court of Appeals, which agreed completely with the Justice Department that the special master process imposed on the case by a judge appointed by Donald Trump should not in any way include the 100 or so documents marked classified that were found by the FBI with a search warrant served at Donald Trump's Florida residence. The Trump lawyers are now arguing that they agree with the appeals court that the Justice Department should be allowed to continue to use those classified documents in their criminal investigation, but that those documents should also be included in the special master process designed to sort out which of the documents, if any, are the property of Donald Trump and should be returned to him. Today, the Solicitor General said that those documents cannot possibly be returned to Donald Trump because he, quote, has no plausible claims of ownership or privilege in the documents bearing classification markings. The Solicitor General reminded the Supreme Court that the Supreme Court itself, quote, has emphasized courts should be cautious before insisting upon an examination of records whose disclosure would jeopardize national security, even by the judge alone in chambers. The Solicitor General told the Supreme Court that the appeals court has already fast-tracked this case for an early decision by the full appeals court, and that makes Trump's emergency request to the Supreme Court unnecessary, especially since Donald Trump's lawyers have told the appeals court that the case does not require fast action and actually asked the appeals court to delay any argument at the appeals court level until next year. We have our team of legal experts ready to analyze today's Supreme Court filing, including Harvard constitutional law professor Lawrence Tribe, who says that the filing, quote, pulverizes all of Trump's arguments. The New York Times is reporting more details about the Trump lawyer who has a criminal defense lawyer of her own and is cooperating with the Justice Department investigation of Donald Trump. The New York Times reported today that attorney Christina Bob's first words were, "Wait a minute, I don't know you," when she was asked by another lawyer to sign a certification saying that the Trump lawyers on June 3rd were then handing over all of the government documents that were then at Donald Trump's Florida residence at that time. The Times reports Ms. Bob, a 39-year-old lawyer juggling amorphous roles in her new job, was being asked to take a step that neither Mr. Trump nor other members of the legal team were willing to take. So she looked before leaping. She later complained that she did not have a full grasp of what was going on around her when she signed the document, according to two people who have heard her account. The Times reports that another Trump lawyer, Evan Corcoran, summoned Ms. Bob to Trump's residence on June 3rd and, quote, asked her to sign a statement for the department that the Trump legal team had conducted a diligent search of Mar-a-Lago and found only a few files that had not been returned to the government. Ms. Bob met with Justice Department lawyers in Washington on Friday. Times reports, quote, she told them that another Trump lawyer, Boris Epshteyn, contacted her the night before she signed the attestation and connected her with Mr. Corcoran. Ms. Bob, who was living in Florida, was told that she needed to go to Mar-a-Lago the next day to deal with an unspecified legal matter for Mr. Trump. Mr. Corcoran, she told the Justice Department, had walked her through how he had conducted a search of a storage facility at Mar-a-Lago for the documents. She said she had believed at the time she signed the attestation in June that it was accurate, according to a person with knowledge of the situation. Each of these legal twists and turns in the investigation of Donald Trump is bringing us ever closer to the day when the Attorney General of the United States, Merrick Garland, will have to make a decision that no Attorney General before him has ever faced. Will he approve an indictment of a former president of the United States? And today, as Alex and I were just discussing, in a new piece for the Atlantic Monthly, Franklin Foer, who has interviewed Merrick Garland and has studied Merrick Garland's career and legal work, makes a prediction in the headline of his article. The inevitable indictment of Donald Trump. It's clear to me that Merrick Garland will bring charges against Donald Trump. It's just a matter of when. After an exhaustive examination of Merrick Garland's career and legal thinking, this article ends with this. Every time he's asked about the former president, he responds, "No one is above the law." He clearly gets frustrated that his answer fails to satisfy his doubters. I believe that his indictment of Trump will prove that he means it. Leading off our discussion tonight, Andrew Weissmann, former FBI General Counsel and former Chief of the Criminal Division, the Eastern District of New York. He is Professor of Practice at NYU Law School. Also with us, Cherry Vance, former U.S. Attorney. She's a professor at the University of Alabama School of Law and an MSNBC legal analyst. She is also the co-host of the podcast Sisters in Law. Also joining us, Bradley Moss, a national security attorney with experience dealing with classified material cases. And Andrew Weissmann, let's begin with the Supreme Court filing by the Solicitor General tonight. A good half of it is about a kind of intricate issue of standing, of does the Circuit Court of Appeals have the right, have jurisdiction in this appeal the way it was brought by the Justice Department. What is your quick assessment of that aspect of the argument?
So it's very much in the weeds, but the issue is, could the 11th Circuit decide the issue of whether a special master could be appointed, or whether that was so separate from the issue they could decide, which was about the stay. And they make two arguments. They make the argument that it is one order that was issued, and so they could appeal the order. And two, that there's a doctrine of when things are inextricably intertwined. In other words, one really goes with the other, which I think is a very strong argument here. The district court actually made that argument. And so those are the sort of technical arguments, but there are a lot of other arguments. In order to prevail, Trump has to show that he would be irreparably injured if there wasn't a grant by the Supreme Court. And I think the government actually makes a really good argument that they're the ones who would be irreparably injured if highly classified information had to be disseminated, not just to the special master, but also to Donald Trump and his counsel. So I do think this is going to end up being something that, when we look back, will be a tempest in a teapot, and it's not really where the action is. It seems very, very unlikely that the court would intercede, certainly while the 11th Circuit is about to hear the government's full appeal.
Justice Vance, what's your sense of, given that the Supreme Court is now well aware that this case is not just moving in the 11th Circuit, it's moving quickly in the 11th Circuit, why would the Supreme Court bother to deal with it?
So I think that's a good question, and the court's answer will very likely be that it will defer to the 11th Circuit. This order in the 11th Circuit to expedite the case means that it will move very, very quickly. In the order expediting, the judge who signed that order indicated he had consulted with the chief judge and that they had agreed that they would put together a special panel that could quickly hear oral argument in this case after all of the briefs were filed and be ready to make a decision. The 11th Circuit signaled as strongly as it could that it was ready to go ahead quickly, certainly more quickly than the former president had requested, since he wasn't at all on board with this notion of expediting the appeal. And ultimately, that may be a factor that the Supreme Court relies on pretty heavily, saying there's no reason for us to act quickly. Trump hasn't asked for it, and the 11th Circuit is up to the job.
Bradley Moss, let's imagine for a moment that your client is Boris Epstein, and he brings you in today's New York Times. And he shows it to you and says, turns out Christina Bobb has told the Justice Department that I told her she has to get over to Mar-a-Lago tomorrow to sign something for Donald Trump. And Evan Corcoran told her, you got to sign this thing. And she said, wait a minute, I don't know you. What kind of legal liabilities do you see in that reporting for the various Trump lawyers?
Significant liability. I mean, at a minimum, they're material fact witnesses. And we've already seen, obviously, that they're trying to interview, and they already have interviewed Christina Bobb. They're getting details about what went on behind the scenes. I mean, let's be clear. An obstruction case is being built here. More than anything having to do with willful retention of national defense information, this is going to be about lies and misleading statements to the FBI and the DOJ. And so whether Evan Corcoran, Boris Epstein, any of these individuals, you better have your own lawyer ready. You better be looking at just how much you were misled and why you gave those instructions to Christina Bobb way back in June.
Andrew Roisman, what are the follow-up questions that Christina Bobb gets, and the other directions that the prosecutors are going to want to go with these other lawyers now that they've heard from her?
There is one person right now who is on the hot seat. We can all debate Christina Bobb's conduct, and certainly young lawyers should take heed to not do what she did. But the one lawyer right now who's on the hot seat is Corcoran. And he only has one option, which is to tell the truth and to say, how is it that Christina Bobb was told to put what she put in the certification, to say that these are all the responsive documents and that a full search was done? Those are two things that we know can't possibly be true. So he has to answer both of those questions, how those got into the certification, and presumably either he told Christina Bobb that on his own, in which case he's got criminal liability, or he will pass the hot potato to Donald Trump. And if I were a betting man, I would say it's going to be Donald Trump who gave that ultimate direction that the full search was done and that all of the documents were actually in the storage bin when we know that the documents were in his office. So that's clearly the next move on the part of the Department of Justice.
And Joyce Vance, Evan Corcoran says that he personally conducted the search. That's what the New York Times is reporting, that he conducted the search himself in that storage room. And on June 3rd, this document is saying, you have everything, federal government, you have everything. If he conducted the search, he knows that the basement storage room is still filled with these documents.
Sure, he does know, and there are a lot of questions swirling around here, going back to an earlier Trump lawyer, Alex Cannon, who in January declined to make this kind of certification and who cautioned other lawyers against searching out of concern that there might be classified material there, that none of them had the necessary clearance to view it, and so he told everyone to stay away. At least that's what the reporting is telling us. So we fast forward to this new situation where we have lawyers who say that they conduct a search, who then make certifications that don't comport with what we learn when DOJ goes in and searches. And there's a very interesting tidbit in the reporting about Christina Bobb, where she says that she heard Trump say to herself and Corcoran that he wanted them to comply, give DOJ whatever they want. And so that puts the three of them squarely in a room together discussing what they're going to do. That makes two of them material witnesses. It's interesting because these are the sort of conversations that would normally be covered by attorney-client privilege. But if she's testifying to them with DOJ or talking about them informally with DOJ, then there's some sense that that privilege has either been destroyed by conversations with third parties, maybe there's a crime fraud exception in the works, but lots of possibility here for DOJ to get information that takes it straight to the former president.
Andrew Weissman, the Atlantic article very carefully going through Merrick Garland's career and work and what the writer was able to pick up and divine, in effect, from an interview with Merrick Garland, where Merrick Garland wasn't exactly going to turn over any cards about this. It comes to the conclusion that Merrick Garland will approve indictments of Donald Trump in this case. What was your reading of that piece?
First of all, the reporter is really exceptional. If people have been following his career and his reporting through the Mueller investigation, and now he's really been terrific. So I think, though, that there are two things I thought. One is I think he was really interesting in talking about Merrick Garland's evolution in the job, and that he was quite reticent and thinking that he really wouldn't have to deal with all of the sort of Trump aftermath, but that he really has evolved. I thought that was really an interesting observation based on his interviews with him. And I also agree with him. I think that Merrick Garland will bring this case. I think that the work still has to be done by the career people, and they have to present to him a prosecutable case. So that's still a big if, but I think that he has the backbone to go forward.
Andrew Weissman, Joyce Vance, Bradley Moss, thank you all very much for starting off our discussion tonight. And coming up, Harvard Law Professor Lawrence Tribe, who was Attorney General Merrick Garland's constitutional law professor in law school, will join us next with his predictions of what the Attorney General will decide to do in the case of Donald Trump. 4220.
Harvard Carters.
Yeah, you did.
And you instantly got the best
last night. It was last night. Now, we have not independently confirmed and corroborated that this voicemail that was played through Sean Hannity is indeed the voice of President Biden, or a voicemail left, which is the White House to the Biden family, Hunter Biden's family as well himself.
But it sounds like
it sounds like him. And I want you to hear this because it's the way in which it was introduced, and I think what the intention was to actually raise the issue. Listen to this.
We're learning even more about Joe and Hunter's interactions, including this voicemail obtained by the Daily Mail from October of 2018, where Joe Biden is allegedly begging Hunter to get help for his substance abuse. Take a listen.
Dad, call and tell me I love you more than the whole world. Hell, I gotta get some help. I don't know what you do. I know you don't either.
It's actually sad.
Well, it is actually sad because he then references the idea of applying for a gun and other things in conjunction with it. I mean, look at your faces right now. You're all kind of grimacing a little bit, and I can feel that there was an ick factor there, to say the least, because of how impactful this is across the nation. What do you think was the talking point that said, let's bring that up?
I remember, if I could jump in on this, telling Donald Trump in 2020 during the election, You can go after Hunter Biden for legitimate allegations of wrongdoing. That's fair game. Do not attack his addiction or the way that his father has supported him throughout it. Almost every American family has been touched by addiction. We have an opioid epidemic, any number of issues. My family's dealt with it. That shows a loving father. That shows a loving father supporting his son through the throes of addiction. It is cheap. It is shallow. There's no benefit to even sharing that. I don't know what Fox is thinking in doing so. And it's just honestly a gutter kind of move.
There was backlash on social media after Hannity played that. They said, I don't think Fox News knows the damage they just did to the Republican Party, mocking the loving father desperately trying to reach his son who's struggling, desperately trying to save the only son he has left. It was, Paul, to hear that, you do hear the desperation. I mean, to Alyssa's point, it's a universal, virtually a universal experience at this point in terms of knowing somebody or loving somebody with a drug addiction and hearing what sounds like the president's desperation.
And people should know this. Addiction is a disease. It is not a character flaw. Cruelty is a character flaw. And I believe that Mr. Hannity is showing cruelty there and ought to be ashamed of himself for dragging a hurt family into this. Alyssa, I perfectly fine to attack him if he did something wrong. That's fine. What a contrast, though, to at least reported conversations in books. Omarosa, a former Trump aide, wrote in her book that Mr. Trump called his son, Donald Jr., a fowler, different word. But we all remember years ago that he went on The View with his daughter. He said, well, if she wasn't her daughter, my daughter, perhaps I'd be dating her. This is how he talks about his children. What a contrast with Joe Biden. Now, nobody's running for Father of the Year. But if you want to talk about parenting, oh my God, any kid in America would be honored to have Joe Biden as their dad.
Yeah, when you asked what would spur them playing that clip, it's just terrible judgment and a lack of moral compass. And to the extent it was supposed to be a political attack, it actually humanized the president, made him seem like a caring parent that millions of families, unfortunately, around the country can relate to. So if it was a political attack, it backfired tremendously.
And by the way, I mean, it's not as if President Biden, who as candidate Joe Biden, was the foil to Donald Trump, who was then president, as the consoler in chief, right? The idea that nearly most of the speeches that Biden will give when he's called to have that empathetic bone showed is the idea of the missing person at the table, the empty chair at the table. And so it's not as if President Biden needs help with people believing that he has compassion or that in that instance. So I just wondered about that. And again, opioid, last I checked, they didn't just impact blue states and red states. It is problematic universally. And again, one more thing, President Biden, then Senator Biden, had to combat the omnibus drug bill. And the idea that at the time he did not view drug use as anything but criminal, and this buttressed that argument. Anyway, just food for thought. Look, he defended the Capitol on January 6th, everyone, but former officer Michael Fanone says that his fellow cops literally turned their backs on him. He's going to tell us more about that after this.
United States of America.
Thanks for having me, Lawrence. Let me say that I think the panelists you had, if they were a law firm, the firm of Weissman, Vance, and Moss, would be dynamite because they got it exactly right. The Supreme Court is really not going to do any favors to Donald Trump. His submission to the Supreme Court was very weak, and what was there was utterly pulverized, crushed by the brilliant brief by the Justice Department. Not only did the Justice Department in the Supreme Court use Donald Trump's briefing in the Court of Appeals against him, because in the Court of Appeals, he was basically saying, slow down, slow down. And in the Supreme Court, the thing he had to say was, it's an emergency, speed up. You can't have it both ways. So he's basically undermining himself, and the Solicitor General made short work of that. But there's another point, and that is she quite brilliantly structured this brief so that in ruling for the Justice Department and against Donald Trump, along the way, it is almost certain that the Supreme Court of the United States is going to make a number of statements that in the 11th Circuit are going to doom Trump's effort to hold on to the loose cannon that he managed to find to give him some relief with the special master. That is, what they will determine about the posture of the case in the Supreme Court will make it almost impossible for him to prevail in the 11th Circuit. So all the smoke will clear, and then the stage will be set for the Attorney General, who in the meantime is allowed, by virtue of the relief he already got from the 11th Circuit, which is not being appealed to the Supreme Court in that respect, is already able to pursue an investigation using the materials marked classified. At that point, there won't be very much work left for the Justice Department to do before the ultimate decision comes to Merrick Garland and is on his desk.
Before we get to that Garland decision, is one of the options on this Supreme Court case at this point for the Supreme Court just in one sentence to just say that the Trump request is denied?
Absolutely. And that would be a perfectly normal thing to do. With an ordinary litigant, that is the most likely outcome, because he doesn't even meet the threshold requirement of showing irreparable harm. As Andy Weissman correctly pointed out, the only irreparable harm is to the United States of America and the Department of Justice in having to slow anything down and show anything to the special master. Because in an ordinary case, you wouldn't need or have a special master. You would simply have the court that ordered the warrant, issued the warrant, ordered the search. There's no claim that the search was illegal. There's no claim that the president actually did anything to declassify the documents, despite his claim that he did it by some telepathic process, a claim that he makes only out of court but not in court. So it's really quite clear that the path is open for going forward.
You've known Merrick Garland since he was one of your law students. I know you've read that Atlantic piece today predicting that Merrick Garland will decide to indict Donald Trump in this case. What is your expectation?
I do expect exactly the same thing, because to his very core, Merrick Garland believes in the rule of law. People call him an institutionalist, but he's told me, and I think he told Franklin Thorpe, that he doesn't use that term for himself. That sounds sort of like a bureaucrat, though in prettier clothes. But he is committed to law, to following the law where it leads, to the reality-based world as opposed to the fantasy-based world. And the law and the facts here inexorably lead to conclusions about the president having taken government documents that don't belong to him, having stored them illegally in unsafe places, having apparently attempted to use them as bargaining chips, telling the government at various points, if you want some of these things back, you want me to turn them over to the National Archives, why don't you give me some of the FBI records that are involved in my supposed dealings with Russia, transactional down to the bone. It seems to me that in these circumstances, it's clear that all three of the crimes that led to the search and seizure, the three alleged crimes, are strongly provable, including obstruction of justice. And that's not even to mention the grave crimes involving seditious conspiracy and insurrection. So the real questions before Merrick Garland are not whether to indict, but when and where and for which crimes. Where, he'll have to decide whether to indict in Washington, D.C., which, by the way, he could do even over the Mar-a-Lago offenses, because they began when he took the documents illegally from the White House in Washington, and it was institutions in Washington that he was stiffing and deceiving when he didn't return them. And when it comes to trying the case in Washington, there one could include insurrection and seditious conspiracy in addition to espionage, theft of government documents, and obstruction of justice. And the question of when depends very much on exactly when all the ducks are lined up in a row, and all of the witnesses are ready. Merrick Garland is not going to bring less than an overwhelming case. That I know by knowing him for all these years. He doesn't do things halfway. He's enormously thorough. And I'm among those who from time to time is frustrated by his thoroughness. When he was my research assistant years ago, sometimes I'd say, you know, can't you get this done overnight? You're so brilliant. And sometimes he would take the extra 3 hours to turn in something that was absolutely over the top. This will be an indictment that is absolutely over the top, leaving no stone unturned. And I think it's important, despite the angst that will generate and the threatened violence and all the rest, that will be the beginning, I predict, of national healing, when we will begin to see that no one really is above the law, that in fact, even the President of the United States, or a former president, is accountable. And I think that will make a big difference, because it's all very nice for people to say, in theory, we're going to riot, we're going to do violent things if you follow the law. Let's just see what happens. I think Merrick Garland is not going to be put off by that.
Professor Lawrence Tribe, thank you very much for joining us again tonight.
Thank you, Lawrence.
Coming up, Democratic candidate for Senate in Pennsylvania, John Fetterman, suffered a stroke in May. Has that experience actually made him a better candidate in the same way that Franklin Delano Roosevelt's being confined to a wheelchair made him not just a better candidate, but the best candidate in presidential history, the only one who won the presidency 4 times? John Fetterman joins us next.
Police conversation, just silence officers, disrespect and harm them. What is that like for you, having that?
I mean, it's outrageous, but I mean, I've come, unfortunately, to expect that from, you know, our political leaders. I mean, specifically now, obviously, we're talking about Republicans, but people like Kevin McCarthy, who I think viewed me as an inconvenience. You know, it didn't fit the traditional Republican narrative that Republicans are for law and order. Republicans back the blue, they back police officers. The Republican Party, as an institution, doesn't care about individual police officers. You know, the Republican Party, I think, like most politicians, cares about public safety because public safety is an issue that people vote about. They don't vote about individual officers. And so, you know, the Metropolitan Police Department, the officers that responded to the Capitol that day, the U.S. Capitol Police, we're an inconvenience. We didn't fit the narrative, like I said. And so, you know, we were set aside. And then in a lot of situations, we were attacked by, you know, the alt-right media, and even some of, you know, what I guess you would describe as like mainstream conservative media, like Fox News. I mean, I was parodied for my, you know, testimony before Congress, and they talked about other officers, and our response that day is having been a failure.
Is it that you didn't, you know, stick to the narrative, or that you didn't stick to the talking point? You didn't fit it, or you didn't stick to it? Because it seemed like, and that was a lot of the conversations we've been having with people all the time and hearing, is about the way that there has been a reaction, not just in law enforcement, but for those who are members of Congress, those who are running for office, who want to say and speak the truth about what happened on January 6th. You're not praised for that. You're punished.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, because right now the Republican Party is held hostage by Donald Trump, and Donald Trump supports those who went to the Capitol that day to participate in an insurrection. And so Republican lawmakers have to walk that fine line of not angering Donald Trump, and also not being seen as anti-law enforcement. And so what they've done, for the most part, is just ignore us, choose not to address the issue at all, which is cowardly. And then you've had a few of, you know, what I call like the tinfoil hat squad, the Marjorie Taylor Greens, the Paul Gosars, the Andrew Clydes, you know, people that have made some of the most outrageous statements about that day, saying that it was a peaceful protest, that these people were patriots. These weren't patriots in any sense of the word, not even in the most traditional sense. Most of these guys, when you look into their backgrounds, they were criminals. There were people that had prior arrests for drug trafficking. There were people that had prior arrests for spousal abuse. These were not people that you would typically see held high by the Republican Party as American patriots. They were misfits, they were morons, and they were malcontents. But those are the people that flocked to Donald Trump and his, bombastic approach to politics. And they were the people that were easily manipulated and turned against true patriots that were the police officers that were there that day and the members of Congress that were doing their job.
Such a great point, Michael. I mean, just because you carry a flag doesn't make you a patriot. It's always fascinating to talk to you, and your book is really fascinating as well. And it'll be things that people have never heard about that are going on with you behind the scenes. It's called Hold the Line. Thanks for talking to us about it. Great to have you here tonight.
Thank you, guys.
Yeah, I really appreciate it. We have so much more to talk about. So you heard Jake's interview where The Rock said that he seriously considered running for president, but well, to tell us when, okay? But we asked you, do you think The Rock should run? Here's what Vincent has told us already. The Rock would not only be the people's champion, but the people's president, and I'm here for it. Is that the yes, I think, Laura?
I think it's a, oh, heck, yes, about that point in time. It's not the first, I'm from Minnesota. The idea of a former wrestler.
You like that? You understand it.
I understand. I can relate to Jesse Ventura notion of it, and The Rock certainly has surpassed that. Anything else you want to say to Allison and me right now? I gotta keep clarifying. Anything else you want to say within
keep it
reason?
Clean is what she's trying to say.
All right, because we do have to know that he's leaving soon. So
yeah, he'll beat you up if you don't. What are you?
It's possible.
Tweet us, Allison Camerata and Lee Lara Coates everywhere coming up.
I always thought I was pretty empathetic, emphatic. I think I was empathetic. That's an example of stroke, empathetic. I always thought I was very empathetic before having a stroke. But now after having that stroke, I really understand, much more kind of the challenges that Americans have day in and day out. Franklin Delano Roosevelt was a spoiled rich kid whose cousin was president of the United States when Franklin Roosevelt was a Harvard student. Franklin Roosevelt went on to become the most empathetic politician of his era only after he was struck down by polio at age 39, which left him in a wheelchair for the rest of his life. He won 2 campaigns for governor of New York in that wheelchair, and he won 4 campaigns for president in that wheelchair. Yes, kids, there once was a president who was elected 4 times in a row in a wheelchair. Franklin Roosevelt brought the country out of the worst economic depression in our history in that wheelchair, and he went on to win World War II in that wheelchair. When President Roosevelt died in office at age 62, a reporter asked an onlooker at his funeral, "Why are you here? Did you know Franklin Roosevelt?" And the man said, "No, I did not know President Roosevelt, but he knew me." That kind of empathy is the essence of the Fetterman Senate campaign, in which John Fetterman, a lifetime resident of Pennsylvania, claims that he knows Pennsylvania voters better than his Republican opponent, Mehmet Oz, who was happily living in New Jersey before deciding to run for Senate in Pennsylvania. Joining us now is Pennsylvania Lieutenant Governor John Fetterman. He is the Democratic candidate for Senate in the state of Pennsylvania. Thank you very much for joining us tonight. I want to ask you a first question about an issue that has become very prominent in these final weeks of the campaign, and that is crime in Pennsylvania. And I want to put the question to you in the form of a Pennsylvania voter and what that voter said to the New York Times the other day. This is a 66-year-old man who's quoted by the Times saying, "I definitely don't want Fetterman in there. He's too much pro-crime." What would you tell that voter?
I'm absolutely not pro-crime. I'm actually a Democrat that I'm running on my record on crime because Dr. Oz has never done a single thing about fighting crime. As mayor in Braddock for four terms as mayor in a community that had significant gun violence here, I ran to be a mayor to fight it. And as a result, we stopped the killings. For 5.5 years, we stopped it. Unlike it's never been done before or since I've become lieutenant governor. I'm running on that. And whereas Dr. Oz has never done a single thing against crime, living in a gated mansion in New Jersey. I run on my record on crime, and I would challenge Dr. Oz to have any record other than just empty words.
What would you want to do in the United States Senate on the issue of crime?
Well, I think it's simply having the understanding of enacting gun reform laws as well. And we also understand that Dr. Oz would oppose any of that. Just in making sure we invest into police forces in cities like Philadelphia and Pittsburgh. Once again, you can't really advocate for Pennsylvania if you don't live in Pennsylvania. I think it's really critical that we also have to get the guns off the street, and Dr. Oz would absolutely never be a part of that solution.
If you become a member of the Senate, would you vote to end the filibuster rule, the 60-vote threshold in the Senate?
Absolutely. In fact, to my knowledge, I was the first candidate to actually call for eliminating the filibuster, because we understood that if you want to have anything accomplished here in the Senate, we're going to need to drop that, particularly in common sense gun reform.
Also, in terms of action in the Senate, would you support Senate legislation to basically write Roe versus Wade into law?
Absolutely. Codifying Roe v. Wade, I run on that as well, too. Dr. Oz celebrated when Roe v. Wade went down. He runs with Doug Mastriano, and they both have these really extremist views on abortion. Dr. Oz believes that the choice belongs with him, where I believe that the choice belongs with women. And between there and a real doctor, not a fraud like Dr. Oz. It's something that I'm running on, and it's definitely energized and angered a lot of people in Pennsylvania, too.
Is control of the Senate an issue with Pennsylvania voters? When you talk to them about the importance of Democrats controlling the Senate, what do you tell them? And is that an important factor in their voting?
It is important because, controlling the Senate allows us to get the important things enacted here. We got to get our minimum wage up. We need to pass the PRO Act. We need to make sure that we have to codify Roe v. Wade. At the end of the day, anything important that Democrats all stand and believe in has to happen if we have control of the Senate. And that's why there's so much is rolling in this race.
If you go to the Senate next year, you will be joining two Democratic colleagues, one younger than you, one a little older than you, both of whom had strokes this year while in office as senators. One took a couple of months off before coming back into the Senate to be able to get back to work full time. No one, including none of the Republicans in the Senate, thought that those two senators should resign their office because they had strokes. Do you see a difference between a sitting senator having a stroke and a candidate like yourself suffering the stroke that you suffered during the campaign?
What the difference is that they didn't have doctors in their lives making fun of it or making jokes about having a stroke. What kind of sick is it? Like, what kind of a doctor that had somebody that was sick that he's rooting on him remaining sick? I can't believe that having a doctor that is cheering on for me not to get better. But the truth is that I'm going to be a lot better in January, but he's going to still be a fraud. And that's the difference between myself and other senators that had strokes too, is that they don't have a doctor ridiculing it and making light of it.
What is your closing argument, your 1 minute closing argument, say if this were a debate to the voters of Pennsylvania?
It's really, I'm running to serve Pennsylvania, and he's running to use Pennsylvania. I mean, that's the truth. And this is a guy that's been in Pennsylvania for 5 minutes and has nothing about Pennsylvania, can relate. People in Pennsylvania have no idea, no clue what it's like. So at the end of the day, you have a man with 10 gigantic mansions. How can you possibly have a life that anyone in Pennsylvania can recognize?
Lieutenant Governor John Fetterman, candidate for United States Senate, thank you very much for joining us tonight.
Thank you.
And coming up, Russian television, echoing Adolf Hitler, is now talking about the extermination of millions of Ukrainians. Yale University Professor Timothy Snyder will join us next.
Not something I was used to hearing or even experiencing, because I'm constantly in that phase of I can be better, I can do more and be better. And she's like, love yourself right now. Embrace it. And that really seems to bother people.
Let's agree right now to stop calling her heavy. First of all, I'll tell you what it is right now. She does. But here's the issue. I mean, and we mentioned the flu. One thing. She got hate for the flu.
Well,
She got hate for
She got hate for playing with flu for twerking with James Madison's. So it's not done some way worse with I know. Minded this moment. Frankly. So she's such a great musician, and she's a classical flautist. Okay, so she was here playing. And I think it's hard to see, but at this moment, she gets this rousing applause, and I think it's a crystal flute. It's a crystal flute, and I think you're going to see that she twerks. I mean, it's truly, that's it. Okay, the end. The end. It was like a 1 second thing, and Ben Shapiro, who's a well-known conservative, said that was sort of degrading. He said, again, I'm correct. Lizzo's performance wearing actual clothing in the Library of Congress was delightful. That was something different. Twerking with pieces of American history is, however, degrading and vulgarizing, and that's the clip the media celebrated. I don't know about the media, but why is he so bummed out?
Honestly, it's worth watching the Ben Shapiro thing if you haven't, because it seems like a parody. Like, if Western civilization is so fragile that Lizzo twerking with James Madison flute is going to throw you into a tailspin, like, we should just call it a day. But that moment, actually, I loved it so much. The thing about her that's so captivating is her confidence and her excitement. And you could tell she genuinely appreciated the history of it. None of us, I bet, even knew that James Madison had this flute until she went to the Library of Congress. By the way, a Black woman going to the Library of Congress, playing a flute of a former slave.
Under a Black librarian.
Under the first, I believe,
Black librarian of Congress.
That's a cool, powerful American moment. I'd argue a conservative should be proud of it. She's a success story and something we should be proud of, but it has a way of triggering certain people. I don't know what it is about her. I love her. I Lizzo all day long.
She's on the cover of Vanity Fair, by the way. I mean, she's also having to respond to Kanye West, who wanted to weigh in on her as well, because, his opinion is so invaluable.
Well, he talked about the weight as well, and he said that, basically that why is being overweight the new goal? And he said it's demonic. But basically he said it's demonic that people are promoting that. She said, I'm minding my fat, Black, beautiful business.
But also, I mean, Kanye West is making this point about her health, right? He's saying he's concerned about her health when this is someone who's clearly neglecting his own mental health. So why does he have a right to comment on what she is doing with her body when she is bothering nobody?
Apparently, America loves to hear from people who want to pick on Black women on television. Right? That is part of that, right? Of what we're seeing here is that she represents so much of what is complicated about America's moment right now and our history, that her even celebrating and being in awe of playing James Madison's flute had people saying, well, why aren't we celebrating a white person playing his flute? Like, it's, let's put some context here, right? At the founding of our country, James Madison said that revolutionary principles were against slavery, yet he brought slaves to the White House, right? So this is part of what she was unpacking in that moment and should be celebrated for that experience.
Is this the moment we should plug my social media? Has anybody going to attack another Black woman? No? You think so? I don't think we need to plug it together.
Lovely comment.
Well, I'm going to tell you something. Here's a lovely comment for Lizzo. I think we can all agree. I'm so glad about your artistry and your talent. Full stop. Everyone, thank you. Speaking of talent and full appreciation. No, I'm just kidding.
What did Mitch McConnell say? I was waiting for this segment.
What did Mitch McConnell say in response to Trump? Well, calling some insults to his wife. And I'll tell you about it.
Can you play a flute? I don't know. We'll find out.
Actually, maybe he can.
Covered Carters.
Yeah, you did.
And you instantly got the best, most competitive offer from our network of thousands of dealers.
So you're selling the car, but keeping the bike. You sell the broom too?
Car Gurus, get the best offer for your car. I'd like to try a Lavazza coffee, please. What is a Lavazza coffee?
Check it out. It's this one. Artfully blended with Italian passion. Yes, upgrade your morning coffee with Lavazza Classico by Lavazza.
Today, Russian television issued the threat to exterminate all Ukrainians.
Мы идем их не убивать, мы хотим, чтобы их переубедить. Но если вы не хотите, чтобы мы вас переубеждали, мы вас убьем. Убьем сколько нужно, убьем 1 миллион, 5 миллионов. Мы всех истребим.
Today, Ukraine's President Zelensky asked for more air defense systems to fight a new onslaught of Russian missiles and said there can be no dialogue with this leader of Russia who has no future. He speaks with ultimatums. Terror is his attitude to the world, to other people. Joining us now is Timothy Snyder, professor of history at Yale University. He's the author of The Road to Unfreedom, Russia, Europe, America. Professor Snyder is one of the powerful voices in the new Ken Burns series on PBS, The U.S. and the Holocaust, which tells the story of the extermination of 6 million Jewish people in Europe during World War II. Professor Snyder, thank you very much for joining us tonight. And when I heard that reference on Russian television to extermination on the same day when I'm hearing your voice in the Ken Burns documentary about the Holocaust, I just had to wonder, what did you think about when you heard them talking about now extermination in Ukraine?
Unfortunately, this is just the continuation of a logic that's been there from the beginning. They began this war with the argument that there really isn't a Ukrainian nation. And so long as we physically eliminate, kill the elite, the rest of the Ukrainians will come along with us. That was already genocidal. As they fought this criminal war, they realized that there are, so to speak, more Ukrainians than they thought. And so the logic goes, we have to kill more Ukrainians than we thought. And when they realize that the entire country is full of Ukrainians, well, then they have to exterminate all of them. This has been the logic from the beginning. There's been a lot more fascism in and around the Russian leadership than people have realized. The person that we just put on air has aired similar fascist beliefs for years.
And, as we watch the Ken Burns documentary, we see once again that it was not, the extermination was not limited to Nazi Germany, that Russia and Soviet Union did its own mass murders of Jews. And so this Russian military is directly linked in its history to this kind of thing.
Very broadly, I think one of the things that distinguishes democracies that work from systems like the Russian system is that we interrogate our own pasts. So the Ken Burns series that you mentioned is not just about the Holocaust. It's about the failure of America and Americans to react to it. That's what a healthy civil society does. It asks questions about the past. The Putin system is a result of what you get when you don't interrogate the past, when you treat yourself as always having been innocent, when you don't ask about Stalin, when you don't ask about the alliance between Hitler and Stalin in 1939, when you don't ask about what the Soviet Union did in Ukraine in the 1930s when millions of people were starved to death. It shows how important history is, because a regime like the Putin regime will always insist that no matter what they do, they're innocent, because in their version of the past, they always were innocent.
As we go forward, what are you hoping for Ukraine? What's next?
The Ukrainians have a very courageous and commonsensical reaction to things like the missile assaults of the last couple of days, or really the missile assaults of the entire war, which is that they have to win. I mean, that's one of the lessons of the Second World War. The right side has to win. And the Ukrainians have shown in an extraordinary way that they can bring their society together. When I was in Ukraine, on some of those streets that were just hit with missiles a few weeks ago, I was talking there in Kiev and elsewhere around the country to people who, after their houses were destroyed, or even after they lost friends and family members, were cooperating with one another. We're speaking with a kind of melancholy courage and the determination to go on. The things that the Russians have been doing from the beginning of the war, are criminal, but they're not going to bring victory to Russia. They're just going to bring more determination to Ukraine. So the simple message is, we help the Ukrainians to end this war. as quickly as possible. That's the best thing for them. It's the best thing for us. And at the end of the day, it's the best thing for Russia too, because it's not going to be good for the future of Russian society to win a war based on the kind of fascist exterminatory ideas which we just saw here.
Professor Timothy Snyder, thank you very much for joining us again tonight. Really appreciate it.
My pleasure.
We'll be right back.
I'd like to try a Lavazza coffee, please. What's a Lavazza?
For next, big sit down with Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson. Not with us, with Jake. Would he ever consider a run for office? Seriously? Yes. And what is it about celebrities that make us think that, well, maybe they'd make great presidents or great governors or anything else?
To all those who never give a second thought to being the first ones in, thank you. ServPro, proud supporter of our nation's first responders.
This is how Tosin lost 33 pounds on Noom weight.
I'm Tosin.
Noom gave her a psychological approach to weight loss.
Noom has taught me how you think about food has such a huge impact on your relationship with it.
Lose weight and make it last with Noom weight. This is Carol Garden. This is how you grow and grow more every day, all day, for more than just meals. Grow your own fresh herbs, heirloom veggies, and more. Up to 5 times faster than the soil. No sunlight or green thumb required. It's even easier and fresher than the supermarket. That's why AeroGarden has earned its 35,000 5-star ratings. AeroGarden changes more than what you eat. It means a fresh way to live. Grow more every day with AeroGarden. Available at aerogarden.com and these fine retailers.
I'd like to try a Lavazza coffee, please. What is a Lavazza coffee?
Check it out. It's this one, artfully blended with Italian passion. Yes, upgrade your morning coffee with Lavazza Classico by Lavazza.
Vicks Vapor Stick. Strong, soothing vapors help comfort your loved ones for chest, neck, and back. It goes on clear, no mess. Just soothing comfort. Try Vicks Vapor Stick.
For inflamed or sore joints, TheraWorks Relief works fast. So get back at it.
TheraWorks works.
For joint discomfort and inflammation, TheraWorks works. Available in stores everywhere.
At Safelight, we take care of vehicles with the latest technology. We can replace your windshield and recalibrate your safety system.
And they recycled my old glass.
Don't wait. Schedule today.
Safelight Repair, Safelight Replace.
Your record label is taking off, but so is your sound engineer. You need to hire.
Indeed.
Indeed you do. Indeed Instant Match instantly delivers quality candidates matching your job description. Visit Indeed.com/hire.
Tomorrow, she's the fake heiress who inspired a hit TV show. Now, after serving 3 years behind bars, Anna Sorokin talks with Jake Tapper in primetime. CNN Tonight with Jake Tapper. Live tomorrow at 9.
If they have your personal information, anyone can be you. Spectrum One keeps your personal data safe and private. That's privacy protection. That's Spectrum One.
It only takes a minute to make a moment. Whether it's a birthday, an anniversary, a thank you, or simply I'm thinking of you, FTD.com has you covered. For over 110 years, FTD has made it simple to give moments a meaning. Shop on FTD.com and select from 100 blooms, bouquets, plants, and curated gifts to say that no matter what the occasion, that this moment matters. Visit FTD.com today.
I'm Arlette Steins at the White House, and this is CNN.
Closed captioning is brought to you by Christian Faith Publishing. Write for a higher purpose. Publish with us. Christian Faith Publishing is an author-friendly publisher who understands that your labor is more than. Call for your free author submission kit. 800-455-1827.
Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson may want to run for president. Check out what he just told Jake Tapper.
I have heard now from both sides of the aisle, the most influential people in politics asking if I would run, hoping that I would run. And again, it's so moving, man, and surreal. I don't know anything about politics, but the most important job that I have is daddy. And my two whys, why I have to take that off the table of running for president. One is 6 and the other one is 4.
I totally respect it. It's beautiful, but kids do age. That's not closing the door for, in 2040, they'll be, well, even before then, 2036, they'll be in college. What about them? You're not closing the door forever is what I'm asking.
No, not at all. I wouldn't do that. I just, thank you for asking that and for clarifying that. No, right now, for my daughters, it's important that I'm home, and that stability is important for me to be there. And that's the most important thing to me.
Well, he's running. That's what I heard.
Oh, sorry. Is there a show going on still? I'm sorry. I was mesmerized for a moment there. Sorry, I'm going to blink a little bit. It was a moment. Let's bring our next guest, John Berman, Stuart Stevens, and Mayor Huck. I mean, of course, I'm joking a little bit about the idea of it, but look, first of all, if he's sitting across from you, he had a je ne sais quoi. I even speak French.
Is that French for neck? He had like an enormous neck. I'm talking about Jake. No. He was. The Rock was huge there. I was thinking about it.
Was it intimidating for you?
It was exciting more than intimidating.
Because I get the excitement part of it. It's like this whole segment relaxed.
What I could be one day.
Right, like anywhere he runs.
So he would be the first professional wrestler as a candidate, right? Jesse Ventura, ran the WWE, and she ran for office. He wouldn't be the first action hero in office. Arnold Schwarzenegger, did that. So it's sort of like there is a well-trodden path down this road if he wants to go that way. So it's not a can. I think with celebrity candidates, the question is, should.
I hear you say that. We have a graphic of our various dalliances with celebrities who have successfully made the transition into politics. And what you'll see is that they're all, this is them dressed as politicians. What I wanted to see was them in their characters because, many of these guys are these kind of superhero types in their characters, And so like Schwarzenegger or The Rock, Ronald Reagan, a cowboy, they play these kind of big masculine American heroes, Stuart. And I have to admit, I'm susceptible to this. I'm very susceptible. I understand why people like this because you think in your head, well, they're big and strong and successful. Why couldn't they be president? And it's like somebody goes, oh, they know nothing about the legislative process. Who cares if they need to know about 3 branches of government? Like, I'm very susceptible to that, but I think a lot of Americans are.
Well, people like people, but we should remember Ronald Reagan thinking big country bonzo. So it was not like all super macho characters. But look, a lot more people read People magazine than they do Foreign Affairs. And so, I think that people are drawn to them. They have a certain charisma. And I think they can be great candidates. I think they can be great in office. Look at Zelensky. And Reagan had great moments as president.
And would The Rock make a great president?
I have no idea.
Neither will many Americans, but they would vote for him, right?
The fundamental question is why would he run for president? Because I think I did so many races for so long, and I think that the essence is what is the logic behind this campaign? Why are you running? And with Donald Trump, it was so transparent. He was running because he wanted to be president. I mean, his ego. He would have been a Trotskyite if that would have helped with the Republican. The Republican Party said, "We'll give you everything we have if you'll take us to power." They cut that deal. So,
I mean, Mayor, is that right? Maybe that's all you need.
He also had the appeal of being rude and being anti-politically correct behavior and sticking it to people, right? The idea that he was, going after the system and doing things his own way. So there was an appeal that it was not about himself.
But no, you also, just on the celebrity front, I think he also had an appeal of being a multimillionaire, and being successful and being a TV star on a big show, that's why a lot of
And also name recognition. It is the #1 thing that local and national candidates have to fight for, is just people even knowing they're running for office. So if you run and people know you're there, that makes it so much easier to get to the next level, right? Getting the fundraising, getting the talking about policy or not talking about policy. But it's not enough on its own to actually get elected. George Clooney had talked about running in Kentucky as senator. His dad is well known there politically. He's had a challenge, right? Matthew McConaughey. So the celebrity alone is not enough. You need the retail piece of it. You need people to feel drawn to you and connected to you. And then people as voters need to feel like they can trust you in a crisis and not just about your own.
But I wonder, part of it, what we're speaking of, you take a step back, is the idea of what we expect from our politicians more broadly. Because I have a feeling, if you think about it, I mean, just recently, Kevin McCarthy's discussion about the commitment to America, contrast that to Newt Gingrich's successful 1994 contract with America. He was pointed out.
Parties for children. That should make for a confusing Halloween night. And who are you supposed to be, little boy? Well, this isn't a costume, bitch, and these are real. Now hand over the Twix. So it's not just about identity, it's about profit. Create the idea that there's a problem, then offer the solution, and incentivize doctors to find patients. Now, of course, there are legit trans, but this explosion in gender precariousness suggests something else. Rather than seriously addressing people with dysphoria, it's not just a money-making fad with permanent repercussions. And for every healthy organ removed, a doctor gets new hair plugs. The kids don't stand a chance, especially when they see the attention they get from this. That's a payoff too. And activists and therapists cultivate the validation. Before you know it, parents are sucked into a consequential crisis. The kids are literally scarred for life. Now, no parent actually believes their healthy child needs to have their genitals removed. Well, my dad did once when I spilled paint in the garage. But it's such an insane thought that these specialists have to overwhelm them with fear that you're not affirming your child. And so everybody keeps a tight lip and don't talk about the kids. Don't talk about the male inmates in female jails or male athletes winning female sports. And please don't bring up the teacher with giant boobs. But if you can't tell male from female anymore, what else can they get you to believe? I think in the end, we're going to remember this moment as a pretty important one. I know I'm definitely going to look back at this just to see how I used to look as a male. What's a winner? Tonight's guest. She's the slack who won't take any crap. Former White House Strategic Communications Director, Mercedes Schlapp. He does physical therapy at Jiffy Lube. Retired Marine Corps pop technician Johnny Joey Joe. She's so bony, her elbow has an elbow. Fox News contributor Kat Timm. You can't walk a mile in his shoes, but you can use them for sheltering in place. My massive sidekick in the NWA World Television Champion, Tyrus. Joey, have you been on the show when we covered it before? I can't remember. Is this the first time?
This is my first time. I'm honored to be here to talk about this memory calamity.
Memory calamity, very good. It's such an this is the fourth time we covered this story, and I don't know if we're making any progress. But I'm like amazing. Nobody's interviewing this person to find out if this is real. Because if it is real, then it's somebody with a serious psychological problem. If it's not real, then it's an amazing prank. But why? But everybody's too scared to say anything.
I'm going to treat it like it's real and it's crazy. And listen, I want so much to be mad at this person.
You can't be.
But I kind of got to get as a guy who makes things out of wood.
Yeah.
And a guy who has lost limbs in life. Like, I'm scared to death when I hit my miter saw or do anything with a saw. And he's just up there just wheeling and dealing with those things.
Let me confuse. She is up there.
I identify as a person who sees that person as a man.
Okay.
So,
okay.
I apologize.
It's the woodworking. But it is amazing doing wood. It is amazing that she has a woodworking job and that this can't be safe, right?
Well, you can't show kids how to do it safely with two giant fake walling around. Like, I'm sorry, but it's just an unsafe thing to do. And I'm sorry, but if that's how you identify, you got the wrong job. Because we have dress codes in high schools because kids' hormones are raging so much. Not have distractions, and you roll up into a high school shop class like that, you're an absolute child abuser.
Yeah. Yeah, I still believe, Mercedes, maybe it's a dream that I have, that this person is, and this is the longest con ever, and then the school's like, okay, like Kat said the last time we did the show, they're just going with it.
Greg, I'm really concerned you're obsessed about this topic. In fact, the last time on the show we did talk about boobs, so I remember this. I really think that that you should think about this as a documentary series. I mean, take it on the road, show up to the school, and ask for an interview and say, where did you get those ginormous prosthetic boobs? Because I don't think you can order. Can you order those?
That's another great question. Those have to be.
And they should have a warning that says, "Don't get near any machinery."
Yes, exactly. You're gonna have a nipple flying in the air.
Exactly. I mean, you have to wonder if they have water in them. Do you imagine? That could be.
That's heavy because that would be like 200 pounds. But
I'm on the way, so we'll find out.
Yeah, but you know, I'm too lazy to do any investigative journalism. I thought that maybe if I could.
Cat would be perfect.
Cat, would you do this?
Yes.
Would you go? I'll give you time off at work.
Yeah, it is work. I don't think that's time off. If it was off, I'd choose another activity.
That's true. You should go there.